So we've added our email input. Now here we're going to add yet another input or another text field. This is going to be called password input, and we haven't created that. That's fine. And we're going to pass a few things. It's going to be pretty much the same what we had before, but there's some differences here. So I'm going to say modifier, for instance, and for modifier I'm going to say modifier dot, I'm going to pass the focus request. So this means, like I said before, let me give us some more space. It's going to get the focus the moment that we are done with email input, right? On keyboard actions, the focus will go directly to our password input. Okay, so this is how we pass it along. So notice this password request, focus request, we created here as a default request, but then we are then passing it along to request that focus, and then we need to pass that object along here to say that, okay, when this email input they hit on action keyboard enter or whatever they do next, they are going to see the focus going to our password input. Next, we're going to pass the password state, I should call it, and it's going to say password, right? And then label ID, it's going to be password, and then enabled, it's going to be true to begin with. We're going to change this, and then it goes to password visibility. It's going to be mutable state, of course. I'm going to pass the password visibility. I'm going to check that out in a moment. And on action, the keyboard actions, lambda there. And then here is, I'm going to put an if statement. I'm going to say if indeed valid password is not valid, that is. I'm going to just go ahead and return whatever the keyboard actions are set up. And then I'm going to call the onDone method here, which then we're going to pass the email, the value, and I'm going to trim that value just to get rid of all the necessary spaces and so forth, and pass the password, also the value, and trim that as well. Okay. Now there's a lot of there's a lot of things going on here, but we will decipher everything. All right, let's go ahead and create this password input there. Create a composable at the bottom here, and voila, if you do that, you can see then we don't need to go through the trouble of having to pass all of these parameters ourselves. So this is really good. In fact, I can also Alt Option enter and put on a separate lines like this, and beautiful, saves us a lot of work. There's one more that I need to pass here, which is IME action. Was IME action dot done. So I'm going to show just done as the button on keyboard. So inside is where we're going to actually do the same thing we did before. I'm going to say outline text view, and I'm going to pass, of course, our password state, and on value change here accepts a lambda, thankfully. And what I'm going to do is, let's say password state that value, I'm going to give it, and we're going to add the IT like this. Looks like right. So this has to be the value. Let's go ahead and get the value like this. So then we can get the IT, right? The actual string that will be coming from our text field. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing, really a lot of repetition, but I guess this is how we learn. And let's see here, I'm going to pass the label, and I'm going to pass text, label ID, single line, the boolean, I'm going to say true. I want this to be single line. Let's cat text style here. Give it a font size of about 18 SP. Color again, goes material theme. Colors on background. Pass our modifier. Pass the modifier that we have upstairs. I'm going to pass the padding. Bottom again, 10 dp. Start 10 dp, and of course 10 dp as such. All right, and then fill max width. We just want to get the whole width, and let's say enabled I want to pass enabled. This guy there. Keyboard options, keyboard type password, and IME action, and pass that one along. Now the great thing about these outline text field, there are a lot of arguments we can pass if you hover over all of this stuff, right? We've passed most of them, max line, single line. Actually, we passed only the single line, keyboard types, options. Now, there's this visual transformation that we can pass. This will allow us to transform visually what users can see or cannot see within this outline text field. So we're going to use that, especially for our password. So right after this guy there, I'm going to just put a comma, and then I'm going to say visual transformation. So it needs a visual transformation type. I'm going to pass a visual transformation variable like this. Let's go ahead and create that at the top here to separate things a little bit. So at the top of our function, I'm going to say val visual transformation. I'm going to say if password visibility, right, that value is true, just say that value like that. I'm going to just go ahead and call visual transformation dot none, right, because in this case everything is good. Else I'm going to say password visual transformation like this. So if you hover over, what is this? Well, it says the visual filter that can be used for password input field. And we can continue. Let's say I want to add a trailing icon. This is, of course, a trailing lambda, no pun intended. So in this case here, we're going to pass another composable called password visibility, which we haven't created yet. And then I'm going to pass the password visibility like such. It's going to be equal to password visibility. So I'm just setting it up with this Boolean password visibility that we're going to be passing there. Password visibility. What is that we want to happen? What's happening with this? Well, what we want to do here inside is as follows. First, we're going to create a visible variable here. I'm going to say password visibility just to get that value. Okay. And then I'm going to add an icon button. So I'm going to say icon like this, button. And when that is clicked, in this case, I'm going to say password visibility, this value, mutable state, that value, I'm going to say is not, set that to not visible. So not visible like this. And inside of our lambda here, I'm just going to pass in icons.default.close. So for our password input also, I have this on action that it's not being used or set up. So let's go ahead and actually say keyboard default action, just like we did before with all the other ones. All right, now we're going to have an issue here because if you look at it where we call it password input, we have this done on done. So this is just like a callback function that will take in the email and the password, right? So when they click done or next in the keyboard, we want to get all that information. So that means then in our user form here, there are a few parameters we are going to pass because we want to obviously process this information. The first parameter I'm going to pass, I'm going to call this loading, and it's going to be a Boolean, and it's going to be false in the beginning. We'll see that in a second. And then I'm going to pass another one called is create account. It's going to be a Boolean too, because we're going to reuse the same form in different cases. So I'm going to say Boolean and make it false, okay, as a default. And then we're going to pass the onDone here method, and this is going to create, well, passing as two strings, right? The email and the password like that. And then we're going to just return a unit. So this is the done method that we're going to be using, as you see here. For now, let's just go ahead and say empty like that so preview can work. Okay, so this onDone here is what it's going to be called right here. We pass the email because it says we need to pass two strings password just so that we still have this preview to work. Oh, looks like it needs everything. Okay, there we go. All right, we'll change that, of course. We just want to make sure that our preview works, so it must pass. We must pass something there. All right, so this is the undone that will be called. So you see here we have enabled. So our enabled here, we set it to true. We need to do something about it. But if you look at the top here, we see that we have this loading variable that we passed, or parameter in this case, right? So what is this for? Well, this is going to be for our login button or create account button, as you will see later. The idea is we want later to check to see if we want to make this button enabled or disabled, right? Depending on the information that we're putting in our email and password fields, like the input itself. So this is important because then we can check whether the loading is true, right? If that's true and the inputs are valid, then what we're going to do, we can then change the state of this button. Okay. So we are going to pass that loading along here. I'm going to toggle it. I'm going to say the opposite of what's happening. So say loading as such. And that happens also with our password input. This is for our password input. Let's say also for our input, email input that is. So loading like this. We'll see in a second how all of that works. Let's go and see. I think everything is set up. Let's go ahead and run, and hopefully we can see something in our screen. I believe a reader. Of course, nothing is showing there. I think it's because I haven't called the user form where, yes, you guessed it, user, and I need to pass a few arguments here for loading. Let's say it's false, right? And then is create account. In this case, I'm also going to say false. So we see a few things, and of course we have a trailing lambda here. This is where we're going to have our email, access our email, and password, right? And for now I'm going to say log d. I'm going to say email form, and of course we're going to have an issue here because of course this user form is using that experimental Compose UI, and we have to add that. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to our reader login screen so we can see things working. Oh, this changed like that. Okay, so now let's see if this works. Run again, and let's see, and voila. Okay, we have these two. If you click, there we go, we can put an email, and you see, because I can put @ and so forth. If you click on password, and then of course I can add my password, and as you click, now of course there are a few problems here. First of all, we have this space in between. That's not a problem. We'll change all of that in a second, but at least we can see that most of it is working. So next we are going to, of course, take care of this spacing issue and also add the buttons and so forth. Let's add our keyboard actions, and I'm going to pass on action like this. All right, so that everything is set up correctly. Okay, should be all good. Let's remove all of this, of course, and put it somewhere else. In this case, let's go back to our components just to have a place where we can have all of these little components live. And of course, back here we have to import all of this, and all is good. And I promise we will finish this and move on, but it's an important concept that I'm trying to show you here. All right, I'll see you next.